The first alarms echoed across the alien flagship like a low growl that refused to fade. The crew shifted uneasily at their stations, their hands trembling over consoles as the lights dimmed and pulsed red. Enemy sensors had locked onto something massive, something impossible, and the data streamed in faster than they could process. A human warship. One word rippled across the command deck in hushed tones. Human. That alone was enough to make hardened officers glance nervously at one another, because stories of what humans did in war had spread far beyond the truth, twisting into something closer to legend than fact. The idea of such a ship appearing in the middle of their armada felt like a ghost stepping onto a battlefield. The admiral stood frozen, his gaze locked on the tactical screen as the blip grew larger. One vessel, just one. But the readings suggested a power output greater than half their fleet combined. No escort, no reinforcements, nothing visible but a solitary warship moving steadily toward the heart of the Armada. It didn't even attempt to hide its presence. That brazenness unsettled everyone more than any cloaked ambush could. It meant confidence that this ship could stand alone against hundreds. The alien officers whispered among themselves, recalling the human war that had burned through 3 star systems generations ago. Even now, no one agreed on how such a young, fragile species had broken fleets apart, how their ships had emerged from nowhere with weapons that defied known physics. They remembered stories of humans refusing to surrender even when cornered, of battles fought to the last breath where every explosion seemed to carry a promise of vengeance. And now, one of those ships was here, within striking distance. Panic rippled outward like a wave. Smaller ships scattered, trying to put distance between themselves and the incoming shadow. Gun crews scrambled, targeting arrays buzzed, and power surged through defensive shields. Orders barked across the fleet clashed with one another. Retreat, surround, fire immediately, hold positions. No one seemed certain of the correct move, because the human warship didn't act like any other opponent. It was too calm, too steady, moving without the fear that should have accompanied such isolation. On the bridge, the admiral's second-in-command muttered that perhaps it was a trick, some kind of projection or decoy meant to disrupt their lines. Yet the scans refused to lie. Every pass confirmed hull plating denser than their heaviest battleships, engines burning with unnatural efficiency, and weapon signatures no one could fully identify. The data alone made seasoned tacticians feel as if they were staring at the unknown all over again, back at the moment humanity first revealed itself as more than just another primitive species. Meanwhile, deep within that warship, the human crew moved with precision and silence. They had faced fear before, but they had also seen what fear did to enemies who underestimated them. For them, this wasn't about numbers, but about intent. Their vessel was a blade, honed for one strike that could shatter morale across an entire fleet. Every motion aboard the ship was measured, as though the crew had rehearsed this scenario countless times. In truth, they had. They knew what alien eyes thought when a lone human ship appeared. They knew the stories whispered in fear, and they leaned into it. Across the alien fleet, communications lit up with desperate chatter. Some begged for reinforcements. Others argued they should attack before the human vessel drew closer. A few, more cautious, suggested retreat, claiming the cost of engaging wasn't worth the risk. But the admiral hesitated, knowing retreat would mean shame and perhaps even revolt within his own ranks. To stand down in the face of one ship? It would stain the fleet's honor forever. Yet to engage and lose meant destruction. The weight of the decision pressed down like gravity itself. As the warship closed in, its presence seemed to warp the very silence of space. No weapons fired, no warning signals flashed, just steady advance. The aliens expected taunts or threats, but humans rarely announced their intentions. They let fear grow in the silence, let their enemy imagine every possible fate awaiting them. And imagination often proved worse than reality. For the young cadets aboard the alien vessels, this was their first real encounter with humans. They had been told of victories over lesser foes, taught to believe their fleet was unmatched. But none of their instructors had spoken in detail about what it meant to face humanity directly. They hadn't warned them about the dread that spread, like fire, making every order sound uncertain, every scan more alarming. Watching the warship approach, the cadets realized why veterans spoke of humans with both hatred and respect. The admiral finally gave the order to lock weapons, but even that felt hollow. Their targeting arrays confirmed what they already feared. The human vessel's shields pulsed with unknown energy fields, layered in ways that defied conventional logic. Even if they fired, there was no guarantee their weapons would break through. Worse, their own ships were packed tightly in formation, and any miscalculated shot risked hitting allies instead of the target. The human captain must have known this. The positioning was deliberate, forcing hesitation at the very moment they most needed decisiveness. Closer still, the ship came, and whispers turned into prayers. Some officers clenched their fists, trying to mask trembling hands. Others wondered aloud why a single ship would approach without firing. Was this a message, a test, or the opening act of something far greater? The admiral tried to summon courage, reminding his officers that no fleet should fear one ship, no matter how infamous. But the words sounded empty against the growing tension. He thought of his family, of the generations before him who had spoken of humanity not as an enemy to be defeated but as a storm to be endured. Now, standing at the heart of his armada, he understood those warnings. The sensors chimed again, announcing something new. The warship's weapons powered up. No shots were fired, but the energy spike was unmistakable. Entire squadrons shifted, uneasily, pilots gripping controls, ready to react. And then, without warning, the warship slowed. It didn't halt, but it drifted into perfect position, angled directly toward the flagship itself. A heavy silence fell. Everyone on the bridge knew what that meant. The human vessel had singled them out. Of all the targets in the fleet, it had chosen the heart of command. The admiral's breath caught as he realized what was happening. This wasn't about destroying the fleet outright. It was about breaking their spirit, showing them that not even their strongest ship was safe. The warship's silence screamed louder than any barrage of weapons. Then, as though to punctuate the moment, the human vessel sent out a signal. It wasn't a demand nor a threat, just a simple transmission. The bridge crew scrambled to decode it, and when the words finally appeared on their screens, the entire room froze. 3 words. That was all. 3 words that would decide whether the Armada held together or collapsed in terror. And just as those words were spoken aloud, the warship's weapons locked in place, ready to unleash their fury. The alien admiral swallowed hard, staring into the abyss of the decision that awaited him. Fire, retreat, or surrender. None of the choices felt like survival. The fleet held its breath, and then the 3 words glowed on the alien flagship's screen, stark against the dim red light of the warning lamps. No one moved, no one dared to speak. The words were simple, but their weight was enough to crush the air out of the room. The crew stared as though the message itself might explode, and the admiral felt a cold knot form in his chest. Humans didn't waste words, not when they had an entire fleet trembling in silence. The message was a statement, a reminder, and a warning all at once. On the bridge of the human warship, the crew watched their own transmission flicker through space. They knew exactly what effect those words would have. The human commander didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the enemy fleet ahead. His crew trusted him, trusted the mission. They had been raised on the stories of humanity's fragile beginnings, when they were mocked and underestimated, when their ships were little more than scrap stitched together with desperation. They remembered the old wars, the ones that had forced them to adapt, faster than anyone thought possible. Humanity had survived not because of numbers or wealth, but because fear could be wielded like a weapon. The younger officers aboard the human ship felt the tension rise but did not waver. They had been drilled into silence, into precision. Every one of them knew their role, knew the timing mattered more than firepower. Their warship was more than steel and reactors. It was history forged into a weapon, carrying the memory of every battle humanity had ever fought. The aliens feared the unknown, but the humans lived by it. That difference was what tilted wars before the first shot was ever fired. Back on the alien flagship, the officers were breaking under the weight of indecision. Some argued again for retreat, pointing out that the human ship had not yet fired. Maybe there was a way out. Others shouted for immediate attack, insisting that hesitation would only give the human warship more time to prepare. But the admiral stood silent, his eyes fixed on the message. He had studied human history, perhaps more than most. He remembered the reports of how humans had entered galactic politics with fire still on their hands. No one had expected them to rise so quickly. No one had expected them to fight with such recklessness that it almost seemed like they didn't care about their own survival. And yet, they had won. The admiral thought back to the stories his elders told when he was a child. Tales of human soldiers who fought with weapons older than spaceflight, who held their ground against overwhelming odds with nothing but grit and strange, stubborn courage. The stories had seemed exaggerated, campfire legends meant to frighten young recruits. But staring at the lone warship now, the admiral realized those tales had been warnings, not myths. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a message from history itself. Meanwhile, within the human vessel, the commander ordered the crew to hold their positions. No weapons fired, no signals sent beyond those 3 words. He knew that silence was louder than gunfire. He knew fear spread best when the enemy had time to imagine the outcome. Every second that passed was another crack in the enemy's resolve. His strategy wasn't about raw destruction. It was about breaking the enemy before the first missile ever left its bay. The younger humans on board whispered to each other when they thought no one could hear. They wondered aloud what it must feel like in the alien fleet right now, to be staring at a single ship and feeling as though it could bring down an empire. Some had grown up in colonies where human resilience was spoken of like religion, where elders reminded them that they carried the burden of survival in every breath. Others had come from Earth itself, where scars of past wars still lay buried under rebuilt cities. For them, this mission wasn't just about winning. It was about reminding the galaxy that humans did not fade quietly. The alien fleet's formation had already begun to waver. Ships pulled back, leaving gaps in the once perfect wall of defense. Some captains, younger and less hardened, couldn't resist the instinct to flee. The admiral barked orders for them to return, but discipline cracked when fear took root. Every retreating vessel spread panic further, and the admiral knew if he didn't act soon, the entire Armada would collapse into chaos. Yet he couldn't shake the thought that firing first might seal their doom. The alien cadets, those barely tested, in real battle, stared wide-eyed at the tactical displays. For them, this was the moment where every story they had heard about humans came alive. They whispered nervously, some asking if the humans were truly as merciless as the old tales said, others wondering why the warship hadn't attacked yet. To them, the waiting was worse than a barrage of weapons. Waiting meant the humans were choosing their moment carefully, as though they already knew the outcome. Inside the human ship, the commander finally stood from his chair. He walked slowly across the bridge, glancing at his crew with calm, steady eyes. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence was enough. Every person aboard knew what was at stake. He stopped at the forward display. The alien fleet spread, out like prey on the hunt, and let out a quiet breath. He knew the aliens were expecting destruction, but he also knew that to crush the enemy spirit, he had to control not only their fear of death, but their fear of the unknown. The 3 words they had sent still echoed in his mind, simple yet devastating. Those words had been chosen carefully, drawn from humanity's long memory of war. They weren't a threat. They weren't a plea. They were a promise, and promises, in human hands, had always meant more than weapons. The alien admiral finally gave the order to prepare weapons, but his voice cracked as he spoke. He saw the hesitation in his crew's eyes, the flicker of doubt that no amount of training could erase. The fleet's gunners powered up their systems, but every movement felt slower, weighed down by dread. Even as their ships turned to face the human warship, the admiral knew they were no longer fighting as one. Fear had already begun to splinter them apart. The human warship drifted closer, deliberate and unhurried. Every kilometer it closed was another blow to the alien's courage. The commander allowed it, savoring the silence. He knew the admiral's choice was narrowing, knew that desperation would soon force a decision. The humans thrived in that space between decision and collapse. It was where they became strongest. The alien flagship trembled under the strain of its own uncertainty. Officers shouted, arguments broke out, and alarms rang from overcharged systems. The admiral pressed his hands against the console, staring at the warship with something between fury and despair. He could not retreat. He could not fire without risking annihilation, and yet he could not ignore the truth. One human ship had just forced an entire fleet into paralysis. The warship slowed again, its weapons still hot, its engines glowing like embers of a coming fire. And then, as if to seal the dread into every heart watching, the ship broadcast a second signal. The crew rushed to decode it, hands shaking as they worked. The admiral leaned forward, his throat dry, knowing whatever came next would decide the fate of his fleet. The words appeared on the screen, colder than the vacuum outside. And before anyone could react, the human warship shifted position once more, moving into perfect alignment for its first strike. The fleet's collective breath froze. The silence deepened. The next moment would change everything. The second signal spread through the alien armada like a spark through dry leaves. Every ship caught it, every screen displayed it, and every officer felt the chill that came with it. The words were not long, but they carried weight enough to shift the balance of the battlefield without a single shot fired. No one said anything for several heartbeats. The alien admiral gripped the railing in front of him, his knuckles pale, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this psychological warfare? Was the human ship stalling for reinforcements? Or worse, was this a warning before something far greater arrived? On the human warship, the commander watched the reaction unfold in silence. His crew moved efficiently, eyes focused on their stations, but they felt the atmosphere tighten as much as the enemy did. They knew the mission was not simply to destroy ships, but to break the Armada's unity. The second transmission was chosen for that exact purpose. It was a wedge meant to split captains from admirals, veterans from cadets, loyalty from fear. And judging by the stammering reports from intercepted comms, the plan was already working. Some alien captains were furious, demanding permission to fire immediately. Others whispered that perhaps the humans were offering a chance to surrender, and that ignoring such an opening would be reckless. Some of the younger crews, less disciplined, began sending private signals to their families, fearing this would be their last battle. The unity that had once made their armada a terrifying force was unraveling strand by strand. The admiral knew it, and it burned inside him. He gave orders to re-establish formation, his voice sharper now, trying to cut through the growing panic. He barked at captains who hesitated, threatened those who disobeyed, and demanded silence on the comm channels. But even as he did, his officers saw the tremor in his hand, the way his eyes flickered nervously toward the human ship every few seconds. The admiral was trying to appear strong, but his mask was cracking. The conflict ran deeper than just fear of one warship. For years, whispers had traveled through the alien ranks about humans. Not just their battles, but their philosophy. Humans fought differently. They fought as though defeat was not an option, as though survival meant bending the laws of probability itself. Alien officers debated in private whether humanity's victories were luck, desperation, or some darker force they could not understand. Now those questions weighed heavily on every soldier staring at that solitary ship. Among the alien fleet, a subplot began to unfold in secret. A group of junior officers aboard a cruiser debated whether to follow the admiral's orders or break formation entirely. One argued that staying meant certain destruction, that the human ship had chosen the flagship as its target, and nothing could stop it. Another said leaving would brand them cowards for life. A third suggested something dangerous, opening a direct communication with the human warship, bypassing the chain of command to see if peace was possible. Their whispers grew bolder as the minutes passed, and though they had not yet acted, the seed of rebellion had been planted. Inside the human vessel, another thread of conflict brewed quietly. Not everyone aboard agreed with the commander's plan of psychological dominance. Some officers wanted to fire now, to prove strength through destruction. They argued that waiting gave the enemy time to regroup or counter. But the commander reminded them that humans had learned long ago that battles were not always won with firepower. Sometimes the battle was decided before the first shot. His authority silenced the room, but the tension among his own crew simmered beneath the surface. As the human ship continued its slow, deliberate approach, the admiral finally gave in to the pressure. He ordered his weapons officers to prepare a full barrage. The fleet's guns powered up, lighting space with energy fields and ion trails. The order was clear: fire at the human vessel. Yet, at the very last moment, one of the flagship's tactical officers hesitated. He whispered to himself that no barrage had ever pierced a human warship's shield before, not in any recorded battle. His hands hovered above the console, unwilling to press the final sequence. Around him, other officers felt the same hesitation. The admiral shouted, demanding compliance, but hesitation in the heart of the flagship was contagious. Meanwhile, a group of alien scouts stationed at the outer rim of the fleet made a chilling discovery. They reported strange readings behind the human warship, distortions in space that didn't match any known phenomenon. To some, it looked like engine trails, faint but growing. The scouts argued whether reinforcements were on their way. If true, then the single human vessel was only the vanguard of something much larger. The report spread quietly among captains, each one imagining the possibility of an entire human fleet emerging from the void. No one dared to ask aloud whether their sensors were playing tricks because fear already had them convinced. The human commander knew exactly what those scouts were seeing. They had seeded the battlefield with distortive fields, illusions designed to mimic approaching ships. It was a tactic meant not for physical destruction, but psychological collapse. To the alien fleet, it looked as though the humans were not alone, and that the Armada was about to be swallowed whole. The conflict widened. The admiral fought to keep order, but captains were already debating among themselves, some breaking ranks to reposition, others holding back in fear of firing into what might be a trap. The once flawless chain of command was fraying under the weight of suspicion and panic. The human warship, still silent beyond those two devastating signals, became the axis on which the entire battle spun. For the aliens, it was not just a ship anymore. It was a question. Was their Armada truly as strong as they believed? Or had they already lost before the first shot? The admiral stared at the vessel on the screen, rage and dread twisting together in his chest. He remembered his oath, remembered the promise he made to protect his people. But he also remembered the stories. In every legend, humans never left their enemies whole. They didn't just defeat, they shattered, leaving scars for generations. He wondered if this was the beginning of his people's scars, on the human bridge. The commander sat once more, his face calm, his voice low as he issued his next order. His crew obeyed without hesitation. The warship adjusted its course, shifting with precision, and angled its weapons so every alien aboard the flagship could see what they were aimed at. No shots fired, just a silent declaration of intent. Every alien heart froze. The subplots within the fleet boiled closer to the surface. Some captains considered mutiny, some considered escape, some prayed the admiral would surrender, while others burned for battle no matter the cost. The fleet was no longer one. And as the human warship drifted closer, the second message still burning in their minds, the admiral realized that the real war wasn't against steel or plasma. It was against fear itself, and fear, when wielded by humans, was more powerful than any weapon he had ever known. The warship's engines pulsed brighter. Its weapons shifted again. The silence pressed down harder. Every alien eye remained locked on the screen. And then, just before the flagship's weapons could fire, the human vessel sent a third signal. The admiral's chest tightened. His crew leaned forward. His entire fleet waited. The words appeared, and everything changed. The third signal hit the fleet like a hammer. The words appeared across every screen, stark and merciless, and the silence that followed was deeper than before. No alarms, no arguments, no commands filled the void. For a few fragile seconds, the entire Armada simply froze, as if the human warship had stolen the very breath from them. The admiral felt his throat tighten as he read those words, again and again, knowing that his crew was doing the same. They were not a threat, not a boast, but something worse, a promise written in cold steel. Whispers spread through the alien fleet like cracks in glass. Captains demanded clarity, but no one had answers. Officers muttered that this wasn't a normal battle, that the humans weren't fighting for territory or resources. They were fighting to make a point. The younger cadets clutched at their consoles, trembling as they realized they were part of a moment that would be remembered for generations. The human warship, alone and unflinching, had forced them all into its shadow. The admiral knew his fleet was fracturing. Reports came in of captains holding back their fire, others refusing to move closer, and some even beginning to turn their ships toward retreat. He shouted for discipline, reminded them of their duty, but his words felt weaker now. Every time he spoke, the crew glanced back at the tactical display, their eyes always drawn to that single vessel in the void. The human ship didn't move quickly, didn't posture with aggression. Its stillness was worse than any attack. Inside, the human warship. The commander sat calm, hands folded in front of him. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his crew, but he didn't let it show. He knew what they were thinking, that some of them wanted to fire and end this suspense. But he also knew that tension was the sharpest blade in humanity's arsenal. He had studied their history, the countless battles where humans turned fear into a weapon sharper than any missile. His plan was simple, brutal, and it was working. One of his younger officers whispered quietly to another that maybe this was too much, that pushing the aliens into despair could lead to chaos no one could control. The older officer simply shook his head and replied that this was the only way humans had ever survived, by making the enemy believe they had already lost before the first strike landed. The conversation was brief, but the truth lingered in the air. Everyone on the bridge knew it. Humanity had never been the strongest, never been the richest, but they had always been the most relentless. Out in the fleet, the conflict within the alien ranks deepened. A cruiser near the outer line broke. Formation, engines flaring as its captain decided to retreat. The move sparked immediate fury on the command channels, but it also gave others an excuse to follow. Within minutes, several ships were pulling back, drifting farther from the heart of the Armada. The admiral's voice thundered across the comms, ordering them back into place, but fewer and fewer obeyed. Discipline was crumbling. Fear was winning. The admiral slammed a hand on the console, his eyes fixed on the warship that had caused all this. He thought of his ancestors, of the legends they had passed down about humanity. He had once dismissed those tales as exaggerations, but now he felt the truth in his bones. This was what they had warned him about. This was why older officers spoke of humans with clenched jaws and haunted eyes. Facing them wasn't about numbers or technology. It was about standing against an enemy who turned silence into a storm. His second-in-command leaned in, voice low and tense, and asked if perhaps they should consider negotiation. The admiral nearly struck him for the suggestion, but he stopped himself, realizing the thought had crossed his own mind. The third message burned in his memory, gnawing at his will. It wasn't just words. It was the weight of every battle humanity had ever fought pressing down on him. On the human warship, the commander gave a single order. Their weapons shifted again, aligning directly with the alien flagship. No shots fired, no energy released, just cold precision. The intent was unmistakable. The aliens felt it instantly. Every officer aboard the flagship stiffened, their mouths dry, their hearts pounding. They weren't being threatened. They were being chosen. Out of an entire fleet, the humans had marked them, and them alone, for destruction. The admiral felt sweat trickle down his neck. He could sense the terror in his crew. Some were ready to fight, others to flee, but none truly believed they could win. He tried to remind them of their strength, of their numbers, but his own voice shook with doubt. Numbers meant nothing when the enemy had already broken their spirit. Around the fleet, chaos spread faster. Captains shouted conflicting orders. Some fired prematurely, their shots falling wide as their targeting faltered against the human ship's strange shielding. Others refused to fire at all, terrified of drawing attention. The battlefield was dissolving into noise and panic. And still the human warship remained silent, advancing steadily, never rushing, never wavering. In one of the alien ships on the outer rim, a group of young officers debated mutiny. They whispered that the admiral's leadership was failing, that he was blind to the truth. They argued that the only way to survive was to open direct communication with the humans, to seek surrender before it was too late. Their captain, loyal but trembling, heard their words and did not silence them. Even he was beginning to doubt. The admiral received another report from the scouts. The distortions behind the human warship were growing stronger, clearer. To the sensors, it now looked like entire formations were moving into position, though nothing visible could be confirmed. The admiral knew it could be an illusion, some human trick, but he also knew his captains believed it was real. And belief, in war, was often deadlier than fact. Inside the human vessel, the commander allowed himself a single breath of satisfaction. The distortive fields were doing their job. The aliens were imagining ghosts in the dark, reinforcements that did not exist, and their fear was multiplying. He had no reinforcements. His ship was alone. But the aliens didn't need to know that. All they needed to believe was that humanity was never alone, that behind every warship lay 100 more. The alien admiral stared at the tactical map, his claws digging into the edge of the console. His mind was torn between pride and survival. If he retreated, his legacy was destroyed. If he attacked, his fleet might burn. Both paths led to ruin. The human commander had trapped him in a no-win scenario, and he hated the realization that he had been outplayed without a single shot exchanged. The tension reached its breaking point as the human warship came to a halt. It hovered in perfect range, its weapons locked and primed, its engines humming with quiet menace. Every ship in the alien fleet fell silent, watching, waiting. The admiral's crew looked to him for orders, but he had none. He could feel the weight of thousands of eyes, waiting for a decision he no longer knew how to make. And then, the human ship did something unexpected. Its comms lit up, not with words this time, but with a tone, a steady, unbroken signal that carried across every frequency. The sound was low, mechanical, almost like a heartbeat. It echoed through the alien ships, pulsing steadily, a reminder that time was running out. The Admiral clenched his fists, his chest heaving as he stared at the warship that had cornered him so completely. Around him, officers whispered prayers, arguments, and pleas. Across the fleet, captains chose between retreat and defiance, between loyalty and survival. The Armada that had once moved as one now fractured into a storm of doubt. The human ship pulsed again, that steady tone growing louder, sharper, until it filled the ears of every soldier in the fleet. It was a countdown, though no numbers were given. A promise that when it ended, something irreversible would begin. The Admiral's heart pounded in time with the sound. Sweat dripped down his brow. His officers stared at him, waiting for the command that could decide everything. The human ship remained still, patient, unyielding. The tone pulsed once more, and the fleet held its breath, knowing the next moment would change the course of their history forever. The tone kept pulsing through the alien Armada, each beat heavier than the last, until even the most disciplined soldiers clenched their jaws in dread. It was not a weapon, yet it struck deeper than any missile. It was a reminder of human patience, human cruelty in silence, and their uncanny ability to make enemies destroy themselves. The Admiral's throat burned as he tried to give orders, but the words caught before leaving his mouth. Then, without warning, the human warship changed its broadcast. The tone fell silent, replaced by a new transmission that cut across every ship. This time, it wasn't 3 words, but a single image. The screen flickered with the face of a human. Not a helmeted soldier, not an officer in formal armor, but a plain, unshaven human with sharp eyes and a calm expression. The sight was worse than any threat. For generations, aliens had only spoken of humans as shadows, as warriors behind blackened visors, faceless and merciless. To see one now, calm, unshaken, staring directly into their fleet, was a revelation none of them had expected. The human spoke, and though the words were few, they carried through every channel. His voice was steady, almost too steady. He didn't shout, he didn't rage. He simply said that they had been seen, and nothing they did now could change what was coming. The alien fleet reeled. Some captains roared at their crews to hold firm, to remember their strength, but others faltered. To see a human face, confident and unafraid, made them realize how deeply they had already lost control of this battle. The Admiral's hands shook, his eyes burning into that human image, knowing the man was looking straight at him. He had heard tales of human leaders speaking like this before, stories of how they won battles not with force but with willpower alone. Now he was living it, and the weight crushed him harder than any physical strike. But then came the second twist, one no one on either side had expected. Sensors on the alien flagship screamed with new alarms. Distortions appeared not behind the human warship this time, but above the entire battlefield. At first, the crew assumed it was another trick, another field designed to mimic reinforcements. But the readings grew sharper, clearer, until the truth became undeniable. These weren't illusions. Something massive was emerging from hyperspace. The Admiral's heart nearly stopped as the void tore open and colossal shapes began to form. Not human ships, not reinforcements for their enemy. These were alien vessels, but not of his own kind. A third faction had entered the war zone, one his fleet had fought before and barely survived. A race that hated both his people and the humans equally. And they had chosen this moment, this battlefield, to strike. The entire Armada plunged into chaos. Officers shouted, demanding clarity. Was this a coincidence? A betrayal? Had the humans lured them here only to unleash another enemy upon them? No one knew. The new fleet spread across the stars like a storm, their sheer numbers dwarfing even the human legends. The Admiral realized with a sickening weight that he was trapped between 2 nightmares. On one side, the human warship, silent but suffocating. On the other, a swarm of enemies who showed no hesitation in opening fire. The first blasts from the newcomers tore through the edges of the alien formation, ripping ships apart before they could even react. Explosions blossomed in the void, scattering debris and panic in equal measure. The Admiral's fleet fired back in desperation, but their formation was broken, their spirit already cracked from the human threat. They were not ready for this. On the human vessel, the commander leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as the battle shifted in ways even he hadn't predicted. He had not called these new arrivals. They were not part of his plan, but their sudden presence offered both danger and opportunity. He could watch the two alien factions tear each other apart, or he could use the chaos to strike directly at the flagship and end this standoff before it spiraled further. For now, he chose patience. He ordered his ship to hold position, weapons, still aimed at the Admiral's command vessel. Let the panic rise higher. Let the aliens wonder if this too was part of humanity's design. Among the alien crews, terror twisted into hysteria. Some believed the humans had allied with their ancient enemies, that this was a trap decades in the making. Others shouted that the humans had somehow summoned them, as though they were weapons rather than rivals. The truth didn't matter. The perception did. And the perception was that the humans were not only fearless, they were orchestrators of the impossible. The Admiral's chest heaved as he tried to steady himself. His fleet was collapsing on two fronts now. His ships were breaking apart, his captains disobeying, and all the while the human warship sat untouched, like a predator waiting for its prey to exhaust itself. He realized with growing horror that this was no longer about winning. It was about surviving long enough to retreat with even a shred of dignity. But could he even retreat now, with enemies on both sides? Inside his own ranks, another subplot deepened. That same group of junior officers who had whispered of mutiny now grew bolder. They began to broadcast secret signals, not to their own kind, but toward the human ship. They begged for dialogue, for surrender terms, for anything that could spare their lives. The Admiral discovered the signals too late, his fury exploding as he ordered them silenced. But the damage was done. Other ships intercepted those signals, and now the entire fleet knew that some among them were already seeking peace. The unity of the Armada was gone. The human commander received the transmissions and studied them with cold eyes. He didn't respond. Not yet. He wanted the pleas to fester, to spread like infection through the fleet. Every unanswered call for surrender made those who heard it more desperate. Every desperate thought weakened the Admiral further. Meanwhile, the third faction pressed harder, their weapons carving holes through the alien ranks. The Admiral's ships returned fire, but their coordination was broken. The swarm spread, surrounding the Armada like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Yet even as they fought for their lives, their eyes kept darting back to the human vessel, still unmoving, still waiting. Its silence was more unbearable than the roar of the enemy guns. The Admiral's mind spiraled. He imagined what would happen next if he lost here. His name would be cursed, his legacy shattered, his people thrown into shame. Worse, if he fell to the humans, the stories would live forever. They would say he was the fool who faced a single warship and lost everything. He could not let that be his story. He clenched his fists, ordering a desperate counterattack against the swarm. But even as he did, his eyes flickered back to the humans. He knew they were waiting for his mistake. The human commander finally gave his crew a new order. Slowly, deliberately, their ship began to move, not toward the swarm, not toward retreat, but directly toward the alien flagship. The timing was perfect. In the midst of the chaos, with explosions lighting the void, the warship cut through the storm like a shadow given form. Every alien who saw it gasped, certain the end had come. The Admiral's heart pounded so hard he thought it might break. He screamed for all weapons to fire on the human ship, his voice hoarse and desperate. But even as the first cannons locked onto target, he felt the futility of it. The humans had chosen this moment. this perfect intersection of fear and chaos to strike. The Third Fleet raged, his armada crumbled. And now, the human warship drew closer, silent, unstoppable, like a blade descending on the neck of an empire. The climax was rushing toward them, faster than any of them could contain. And the admiral knew with icy certainty that whatever happened, next would decide not only this battle, but the very future of his people's place in the galaxy. The warship's weapons glowed. Its engines flared. Its silence screamed louder than all the explosions around it. And then, just before the first volley could fire, the human ship sent a fourth signal. The fleet braced. The admiral's breath caught. The universe seemed to hold. Still, the fourth signal cut across every frequency, silencing the battlefield more effectively than any weapon. The alien admiral stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. The human warship had sent only 2 words this time, but they were worse than a threat, worse than a demand. They were final. The words glowed across every console, every ship in the Armada reading them in stunned silence. Too late. The admiral's hands shook. He felt every eye on the bridge turn toward him, waiting for his reaction, waiting for orders. But his mind faltered. Too late for what? Too late to run? Too late to fight? Too late to survive? The ambiguity gnawed at him more than certainty ever could. It meant the humans had already set events in motion, events no order could stop. Then, the warship moved. It surged forward, its weapons fully charged now, light spilling across its dark hull like the first rays of a storm. The swarm of the third faction hesitated, their attacks faltering as they registered the shift. Even they, enemies of both sides, recognized the moment for what it was. Something final had begun. The alien admiral roared for all weapons to fire, and the order was obeyed in a frenzy. Beams of plasma and arcs of energy lanced across space, converging on the lone warship. Explosions lit the void, blooming across the human vessel's shields, each blast so bright it blinded the eyes. For a heartbeat, the alien crew dared to hope. But when the light faded, the warship still advanced. Its shields held, layered and shifting in ways no calculation could predict. Every blast that should have pierced through was redirected, absorbed, or simply dissolved. The humans fired back. Their weapons weren't like anything the aliens knew. The first volley sliced through 3 cruisers in silence, their hulls breaking apart as though cut by invisible blades. No thunder, no drawn-out destruction, just precision. Ships that had survived dozens of campaigns vanished in seconds. Panic erupted across the Armada as captains screamed conflicting orders. Some tried to regroup, others fled, and still others fired wildly in desperation. The admiral's flagship shook under the tremors of nearby explosions. Officers struggled to maintain control as more of their formation collapsed. But even as the swarm pressed in from one side, it was the humans who dominated every thought, every fear. The warship didn't scatter its fire. It struck surgically, dismantling the fleet one piece at a time, breaking it not only in body but in spirit. Inside the human vessel, the commander stood calm, his orders sharp and precise. He had waited for this exact moment when fear reached its peak and the enemy cracked. His crew worked with quiet efficiency, targeting key ships, unraveling the fleet from its core outward. For them, this wasn't just a battle. It was proof that humanity could not be ignored, could not be underestimated, and could not be erased. But then, in the midst of chaos, something happened no one expected. One of the alien ships broke formation, not to flee, not to fight, but to turn its weapons on its own flagship. A mutiny, born of despair and whispers of surrender, had erupted. The cruiser unleashed a barrage, striking the admiral's vessel with brutal force. The flagship's shields flared, systems screaming, and the admiral's crew cried out in disbelief. Betrayal in the middle of battle. His own fleet had turned against him. The admiral staggered, gripping the rail as sparks rained across the bridge. He realized then that he had lost. not to the humans' weapons, but to their will. They had broken his unity. His armada was no longer an armada. It was fragments of ships, fragments of loyalty, fragments of hope. The war was over before the first mutiny shot was even fired. The human commander saw it unfold and knew the moment to end it had come. He ordered a full strike on the admiral's ship. The warship's weapons flared like suns, unleashing a barrage that slammed into the flagship with devastating force. Shields shattered, hull plating cracked, and systems overloaded in a storm of fire. The admiral's ship reeled, burning, drifting helplessly in space. And then came the twist. The human warship halted its assault just as the flagship was about to be destroyed. Engines burned, weapons charged, but no final strike came. Instead, the humans sent one last transmission, not words this time, but coordinates. The data streamed across every surviving alien vessel, flashing insistently on their consoles. The admiral, bleeding and broken on the bridge, stared at the coordinates in disbelief. They weren't random. They pointed to a system deep within, alien territory, a system known only to their highest command, a system holding their greatest secret, the location of their hidden war foundries, where new fleets were built in silence. Somehow, impossibly, the humans knew. The realization crashed over him. This entire battle had been a distraction. The lone warship hadn't come to destroy his armada. It had come to pin them here, to paralyze them with fear, while something far worse happened elsewhere. The admiral's chest tightened as he imagined human fleets, real fleets, descending on their foundries while he wasted everything here. Too late. The words made sense now. Too late to stop what was already burning behind them. He fell to his knees, the weight of failure crushing him. Around him, officers panicked as they realized the same truth. Their fleet was collapsing here, their future collapsing elsewhere. Humanity had struck not with numbers, but with precision that cut deeper than any war ever had. On the human bridge, the commander finally allowed himself a breath of satisfaction. The battle was not won with fire, but with foresight. While his single ship held an entire armada frozen, humanity's true strike force was dismantling the alien war machine at its roots. This was the lesson. Fear was a weapon, but knowledge was victory. The swarm of the third faction, seeing the armada break, pulled back suddenly. They had come to feast on weakness, not to face humans directly. With the alien fleet shattered and the humans unmoved, they withdrew into the dark, leaving behind wreckage and silence. The alien admiral, slumped and defeated, whispered that his people would never forget this day. Not because they had been destroyed in battle, but because they had been undone by their own fear. Humanity had forced them to turn on themselves, and in doing so, revealed the one truth no empire could deny, that humans fought wars long before the first shot. The human warship, its mission complete, turned slowly away from the burning battlefield. Its engines flared, cutting through the wreckage, leaving the silence of victory behind. No words, no final taunt, only the memory of what had been done. But as the warship disappeared into the void, the unexpected twist lingered. Among the alien survivors, whispers began to spread. The humans hadn't destroyed them completely. They had left them alive, humiliated, and burdened with knowledge of their own weakness. It wasn't mercy. It was a message, a seed of fear that would grow across every corner of their empire. And deep within the admiral's fractured heart, another thought festered, one even more terrifying than defeat. If a single human ship could do this, what would happen when the humans decided to bring their full strength into the stars? The battlefield drifted into silence once the human warship disappeared into the void. Wreckage from broken cruisers and shattered frigates floated like ashes across the stars, glowing faintly from fires that refused to die. The alien armada was no longer an armada, only scattered survivors clinging to order that no longer existed. The swarm of the third faction had vanished as well, slipping back into darkness, content to leave behind ruins and terror. All that remained was the echo of what had happened, the memory of a single warship that had unmade an empire without needing to finish the kill. The admiral sat slumped on the bridge of his ruined flagship, his face pale beneath the flickering lights. His crew moved like ghosts, silent and shaken, unwilling to meet his eyes. They knew, as he did, that the battle was not just lost. It had been a lesson, carved into their minds with surgical precision. The human message, too late, still burned in every console, a reminder that while they fought shadows here, their future had been gutted elsewhere. Reports began to filter in from deep space, faint transmissions from colonies near the Foundry, worlds. The news was fragmented, filled with static and fear, but the meaning was clear. Their secret shipyards had been attacked. Entire fleets had been torn apart before they ever launched. The humans had struck at the heart while one ship held the Armada hostage. The admiral closed his eyes, feeling the weight of generations pressing down. He thought of the stories he had once dismissed, the tales of humans who never fought clean. Never fought fair, but always fought with an intensity no one else could match. Now he understood why those stories endured. Humanity did not win wars with strength alone. They won with vision, with timing, and with the will to bend fear until it served them like a blade. He knew his people would speak of this day for centuries, not as a battle, but as a warning. Across the surviving ships, smaller stories unfolded. The junior officers who had whispered of mutiny sat in silence, ashamed of the part they played, yet secretly grateful to still be alive. The captains who had tried to flee now faced disgrace, their names already carried on angry comms from ship to ship. Others prayed quietly, thanking the stars that the humans had not unleashed their full power, that they had been left alive at all. No one dared call it mercy. Everyone knew it was something colder, a choice to let fear live longer than fire. Back on the human warship, the crew sat in weary silence as their vessel sailed homeward. They had carried out their mission without hesitation, but now that the battle was behind them, the weight of what they had done settled in. Some officers exchanged glances, wordless but heavy. They had seen fear on the faces of their enemies, seen entire fleets collapse without needing to be destroyed. Part of them felt pride, but part of them felt something else. A quiet unease that humanity's greatest weapon was not their ships or their guns, but the terror they inspired. The commander remained composed, watching the stars stretch before them. He knew the mission had succeeded exactly as planned. The foundries were destroyed, the enemy's will shattered, and the Armada broken. But he also knew this was not the end. The message they had left behind would ripple through the galaxy. Empires would whisper of humans with renewed dread. Some would hate them more. Some would seek alliances, and some would wait in fear for the day when the humans came again. That was the real purpose of this mission. Not to win a single battle, but to shape the memory of an entire galaxy. In the days that followed, scattered survivors of the alien fleet limped back to their home systems. Reports of the battle were chaotic, filled with contradictions, but one truth remained the same in every version. A single human warship had stood against hundreds and prevailed. The Empire's leaders struggled to contain the panic, branding the Admiral a failure, punishing those who fled, and silencing those who spoke too openly of fear. But suppression could not erase memory. Every soldier who had faced that warship would carry the truth with them, and soldiers talk. Among the younger generation, the story spread fastest. Cadets whispered about the human face that had appeared on their screens, calm and unflinching. They spoke of the words too late with the reverence of a prophecy. Some swore they could still hear the steady tone, pulsing like a heartbeat in their ears, and though their leaders tried to frame it as a rare anomaly, the cadets knew better. The humans were out there, watching, waiting, and preparing. The Admiral, was stripped of his command, branded the cause of their humiliation. Yet even in disgrace, he understood the truth his leaders would not admit. The humans had not won because of him. They had won because they were different. He spent his final days haunted by the thought that perhaps his people had never truly understood what humanity was. They had thought them reckless. They had thought them weak. But they were something else entirely, an enemy who fought with time itself. For humanity, the story traveled in another way. The warship returned home, scarred but unbroken, its crew carrying with them the silence of victory. On Earth and across the colonies, news spread of what had been done. Some hailed the crew as heroes, others as monsters, but all agreed on one thing. Humanity had proven again that they could not be ignored. The commander's report was simple, free of embellishment, but the message was clear. Fear had been planted. Their enemies would now live with it. In the years that followed, the memory of that battle changed the course of the galaxy. No alien fleet formed without glancing nervously at the edges of their sensors. No admiral made plans without considering what might happen if even one human ship appeared. Treaties were signed faster, borders were watched more carefully, and, in hushed voices, even the most powerful empires admitted a new truth. Humanity had claimed its place, not by conquering, but by teaching the galaxy to fear the day they truly came in force. The final twist lingered in silence. Humanity had not destroyed the alien Armada. They had not needed to. By leaving survivors, they ensured the story would spread farther than wreckage ever could. It was not mercy. It was strategy. The galaxy now carried their legend forward, growing, with every retelling, until the thought of humans became as dangerous as their weapons. And so the stars bore witness to a simple truth. Battles could be fought with fire and steel, but wars were won with fear, memory, and resolve. Humanity had mastered all three, and though the void grew quiet once more, every ship that sailed it from that day forward did so with the same thought echoing in the dark. If a single human warship could bring an empire to its knees, what would happen when the humans finally came together not as one ship but as a fleet? The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the answer.